Hello and welcome to the Car Care channel. And folks, the 6th generation 4Runner is here. In today's video, we're going to do a very in-depth look at the 2025 Toyota 4Runner is 6th generation. We're going to cover everything mechanical inside every single corner of this to answer one simple question. Is this a worthy upgrade of the legend 5th generation 4Runner or not? Right after this. Let's talk about the engine of the 6th generation 4Runner, and with that we have one engine option, both hybrid and non-hybrid. Talk about the hybrid system in detail in a little bit. So the engine in the 4Runner is no longer the beloved 1GR FE. We have the T24A FTS 2.4 liter 4-cylinder turbo. Let's dive into it because this engine's been around for a bit and it's kind of slowly making its way to every single model. Starting at the top, mechanical construction does have a plastic valve cover. Underneath that, you do have a two-piece cylinder head with roller rockers and hydraulic lifters. You do have dual VVTi that are both oil controlled. You do have the actuators in the front. Very simple design, doesn't have any electronic, nothing, just oil controlled in the very basic fashion. This does have two timing chains, one for the cams to the crank, one for the oil pump. Oil pump is a variable electronic oil pump. You do have a two-piece front timing cover to avoid that area where the head meets the block meets the timing cover. So you have timing cover, all chain stuff, another timing cover in the front. The fuel injection in this engine is D4S. So you have 4 port injectors, 4 direct injectors. They could work either or together. The only thing I dislike about this engine is the location of the direct injectors. They sit right on top. If you want to remove the valve cover, gotta remove the injectors. That's the only downside. The good side is, however, they are very accessible. They're not buried underneath the intake manifold, so if you want to access them, they're right there. But because they are right there, they are extremely loud. Very loud when they're running. I mean, you park next to a wall, you're going to think something is falling off. So I'm happy that they are continuing that fashion, just like the 1GR when it starts clattering. The cooling system here is pretty basic. So you have a mechanical water pump. You do have a electric fan. No longer you have that roar when you start the 4Runner. It has an electric fan, which I actually like better than the mechanical one. It makes service very simple. Everything is simple. The only concern I have with the cooling system is there's a lot of plastic. More plastic. The 5th gen 4Runner did have a little bit of plastic, but this has a lot more. All the hoses are quick disconnect. They are high quality though, I gotta say the truth here. But I wish they were just hose and clamped like before. That would be nice, but I still see a lot of metal pipes and everything is, folks, the quality of things here are very high. And that is something that truth have to be said. This is a lot higher than even the Tacoma because this is made in Japan. That's the best part about this. Now, this engine, of course, is turbocharged. That's a lot of folks have concerns about that. Let's talk about turbocharger. We'll talk about a few things here. So this is a single turbocharger. It's not really large in size. It is oil and coolant cooled. But here's the interesting part. This is old school. The wastegate on this turbo is vacuum operated. This is the simplest and most reliable way to operate a turbo because you don't have a little electronic actuator that's right there in the hottest area of the engine. You just have vacuum, have a little modulator, and that's it. Very cool. And another thing that is old school is the air-to-air intercooler. Doesn't have, not like the Tundra, doesn't have the liquid-to-air intercooler, although they're more efficient, but they're a lot more complicated. It doesn't have that. Just regular old school air-to-air intercooler in the front. And folks, something about the turbo engines, because a lot of people will be concerned about the reliability. 5th generation 4Runner had a 1GR FE. That engine, even if you neglect it, it'll just keep going. This one, however, you neglect it, it's a bad idea. With turbo engines, folks, maintenance is key. If you want this engine to last, and so far things have been going well for this engine, unlike some other newer engines from Toyota Turbo, this one is doing well so far. Because it's actually, if you really look behind the scene and you take the I will never accept a turbo engine attitude, it's actually not a complicated engine. I'm looking at this, there's a lot of space around it. It's actually DIY friendly. There isn't much to it. Spark plugs will take you 5 minutes to do. Basic maintenance is very basic. You have a lot of space in the front, a lot of space on the sides. So it has a lot of the good things going for it. But maintenance is going to be key. And I'm going to give you this advice. Don't do the 10,000 mile oil changes if you plan to keep this for 15, 20 years. Very bad idea. At the max, 5,000 miles, 6 months. With turbo engines, even less. Use high quality oil, original filter. If you don't want to spend an arm and a leg, do it yourself. This engine is so simple to work on. Oil filter is very accessible. Drain plug is very accessible. It's a super basic engine to maintain, DIY. Don't neglect this engine and you're not going to have problems. That's all I'll tell you about the turbo engine if you're concerned. Let's talk about the hybrid variant of the 4Runner. So the hybrid variant will be available as an option in TRD Off-Road, in the Limited, and Standard on the TRD Pro, Trail Hunter, and the Platinum. So something about this hybrid system, it's very similar to that of the Tacoma with the exception of one thing that is different. It's called a 1 MHV system, one motor hybrid vehicle. So this system is a parallel system. It is not really meant entirely for efficiency only. It's actually meant to produce more power. So the way this works is you have the engine, you have a regular 8-speed transmission, the L580, but between them, you have an electric motor and a clutch. That clutch can engage that electric motor or disengage it. So the way this works is that motor can start the engine, you engage it, you supply power to it, it's going to start the engine, and then the engine can drive the car, or the engine and the motor can drive the car, or the engine can drive the car and at the same time drive that motor, which will generate. So basically, it's a boost more than it is for efficiency. You're going to have very minimal EV time with these cars, and they're really meant for more power. That's the whole idea. Now, here's the interesting things here. The battery in the 6th Gen 4Runner, the hybrid one, is a nickel metal hydride. It's not a lithium ion. It just went with old, trusty, proven. And it does have a cooling system. It's air cooled. Does have 2 filters. They're all the way in the back. Make sure you don't block them, you don't cover them, and you keep those filters clean. That is the lifeblood of that hybrid battery. Now, the only difference between this and the Tacoma, if you option a 4Runner with the additional auxiliary switches that are meant for you to use them to power up aftermarket accessories that you will install, the hybrid model will now get an alternator in addition to the DC to DC converter. So the way hybrids work is where the battery would be, you would have something called a PCU. That is kind of the brain of the hybrid system. That's what sends power to the motor, takes power from the motor, charges the battery, and inside of it as well, there's something called a DC to DC converter that takes that high voltage, changes it down 12 volts, charges the auxiliary battery, and powers the entire car. But in the ones that have the auxiliary ones, they added an alternator. That alternator helps exclusively power those auxiliary switches. And this is the cool thing, if the hybrid battery fails in a 6th Gen 4Runner that has the alternator, the system will default to engine driving all the time. Basically, the car will turn into a non-hybrid, and the alternator will start charging instead of the high voltage system. So basically, if your hybrid battery goes out, you can just drive business as usual. Just turns into a non-hybrid. That is actually super cool. And the other thing is, the hybrid variant does have a starter. Certain operating conditions, they'll actually use it. But in a case of a failure, when you have an alternator, they'll just use that. So it'll 100% turn itself into a non-hybrid. So 15 years down the road, if the hybrid battery decides to call it quits, well, I guess we don't have a hybrid anymore. We just have a regular car. I love that idea. You see what I mean by that? That's actually pretty cool. I wish that alternator was actually available in all of them as an option. I'd be the first one to buy it if I were buying 4Runner. Let's take a look at the transmission of the 6th generation Toyota 4Runner. This is the AL80 8-speed automatic transmission. This transmission is basically a reconfigured UA81 from like a Highlander, from a lot of other models that is just a regular front-wheel drive 8-speed that they reconfigured for this configuration. You have 2 versions of this transmission. You have the 4-wheel drive model, you have the 2-wheel drive model. Really, they're exactly the same transmission, it's just the tail the tail shaft is different to accommodate a transfer case or not a transfer case, just drive shaft through. So a few things about this transmission compared to the old one. The old one had a 5-speed, which is pretty ancient. This one, the ratios are very close to each other, so you may feel it shifting a lot, but it's not jarring, or it's gonna result in a smooth and kind of linear acceleration, not you go up in RPM then it just comes down a lot like the 5-speed. Few highlights about this transmission compared to the old one. This one is also sealed. It's not actually sealed, it just doesn't have a dipstick. You do have a single plug, not like the old one which had two. The old one had a drain and then the standpipe to check the fluid level. This one has one drain plug. So basically you take that drain plug, there's a standpipe, you take the standpipe, and then you drain the fluid. That's how this works, very simple. It is a steel oil pan with a rubber gasket, so it doesn't have sealer to seal the pan. Few interesting things about this is a cable transmission. So if you look on the passenger side of the transmission, you will clearly see a very similar neutral safety switch than the previous one. This neutral safety switch in the 5th generation, they had a lot of issues, so I hope they improved it on this one. It's pretty much the same accessible spot, does have a cooler, does have whatnot. Everything about the transmission looks good. Now, some folks will ask this question, so let me answer it. Is this the same transmission in the Land Cruiser, the 250 series, and the 2024 and up Tacoma? Yes. The main difference is this car is made in Japan, so I wonder if the sourcing of this transmission is different than that of the Tacoma and the Land Cruiser. Well, the Land Cruiser made in Japan as well, but this is basically the last car to come out with this transmission, so we'll hope everything is good. Let's talk about the 4-wheel drive of the 6th generation 4Runner. So you have 3 configurations in the 6th gen, just like the 5th gen, same thing. You have 2-wheel drive, you have part-time 4-wheel drive, and you have full-time 4-wheel drive. In the part-time 4-wheel drive, in the front, you're going to have an ADD actuator or auto disconnecting differential. That is what engages and disengages the 2 axles to the shaft that is coming from the transfer case. In the transfer case, you're going to have another actuator that engages and disengages 4-wheel drive and engages for the low range. And then the full-time 4-wheel drive, just like the previous one in the limited model, you do have a Torsen limited slip center differential. You don't have an ADD actuator in the front because now you can spin all 4 wheels at different speeds because you have that limited slip center differential. However, the transfer case is different because you do have 2 actuators instead of 1, because you have that second actuator that can lock the center differential and unlock it. That is the only difference. The 6th gen 4Runner can also be optioned with a rear lock-in differential. That is optional and available. Now, both the transfer case and the ADD actuator are DC motors. They have mechanical switches, a little bit on the old school side, I gotta say that, which is good. Simple to operate, not simple to diagnose when they break, but as long as we're activating them every month or so, making sure we move through all the shifts, we shouldn't have issues just like the past. Now, a few observations here. The front differential, the differential itself is still cast iron. That is actually pretty interesting. It feels to me like it's smaller, but that might be because it doesn't have the big arms like the 5th gen. But the tailpiece that comes out of it for the passenger side axle is aluminum. So I'm actually glad they did that, because they're trying to save weight, and you could see it, but they kept the differential cast iron. This makes it very strong. Now, it is unknown and too early to tell if we still have the needle bearing issues with these. It does look like a different differential. Time will tell, and we will see. And good news for 6th gen owners, the drive shafts are identical to the previous one. I mean, the rear one is a little bit different, but the front one is identical. So, because of that, you have grease fittings on the U-joints, you have grease fittings in the yoke. On the rear one, you have grease fittings on the U-joints. The yoke has a rubber boot that contains the grease, so it's a sealed yoke. I'll take this over, for example, the previous generation Tacoma, which had nothing. That's actually very good news. It is not some strange, weirdly welded drive shaft. No, it looks almost the same as the 5th gen. That's all I'll tell you. Let's talk about the steering and the suspension of the 6th generation 4Runner, starting with the steering. This is a major change from the previous generation. We no longer have a hydraulic power steering, we have an electric one. And the style they used here is you have the motor that has a little belt drive to drive the rack. It is outside, not on the column. There's good and bad. Good is this is a more responsive system, it's more compact, it has a better feel to it than the one in the column. Bad thing is you have a giant motor here that takes more space, but you don't have a giant V6 here taking up all the space, so I guess there is a trade-off. The good thing is with electric power steering, we don't have leaks, we don't have fluid to change, you don't have to worry about all that. There really isn't much to do with these electric racks. Let's talk about the suspension of the 4Runner, starting with the front suspension, actually starting with the shock absorbers, because we have a lot of changes here. Gone is the X3S system, and join me in not mourning that system. That was terrible, cost thousands to fix, and failed regularly in the 5th gen. We don't have that anymore. We have a lot of different options. Let's talk about them. If you have the SR5 or TRD Sport, you will have regular twin tube shocks, reliable, basic, nothing special about them. That's kind of like the previous SR5. If you have a TRD off-road, you will have Bilstein shocks with remote reservoirs. That's actually pretty cool. That's a really good shock. Then if you get into the limited, like this one, or the platinum, which is a new trim on the 4Runner, you will have AVS shocks, which are advanced variable suspension. Basically, you can change the stiffness of the shock electronically. You have a little actuator on each shock that controls that. I was gonna say I was not very impressed by this. They're very expensive to replace the AVS shocks always, because this is a Lexus feature basically, and they're extremely rough. On this limited, very rough, even on the softest setting. You put it in sport though, it does make a huge difference. It gets a lot more stiff. So I guess something works. Moving on from that, the Trail Hunter will have Old Man E-Boom, very similar to those in the Tacoma. I can't wait to drive them. We haven't even driven a Trail Hunter yet. TRD Pro will also have the Fox shocks, similar to the Tacoma. They are adjustable on the Fox shocks, very similar to the Tacoma, and I hope they are not even more jarring, because this is very jarring, the limited one. A lot have happened with the suspension changes. It is still a double wishbone. Upper control arm is steel. The knuckle now is aluminum. Lower control arm is steel. The sway bar moved from the front to the back. It's a very big sway bar link. I really like its location. I feel like this is a better location because now you can service the shock, except we don't have it to tangle with the sway bar. I like that. And the 4Runner in certain trims will have a disconnecting front sway bar. Unlike the previous one, which had the ancient KDSS, which was nothing but for problems when the problems start. I like this a lot better. It works a lot better. It's a lot less complicated, and things are great. This one, like the Tacoma, will have a big actuator that can mechanically disconnect the front sway bar. Very simple, works great. This particular one does not have that, so it just has a regular good old sway bar, but now it's in the back, not in the front. So a little bit about the wheel bearing and everything here. So this cap changed. It's a much smaller cap, and I feel like short of grabbing a measuring tape and measuring it, it feels smaller to me. The hub, it's still a 6 lug. The lug nuts are significantly larger than the previous one. And the interesting thing is this is still a bolt-on hub. The only problem I have is these are cars I hope will last. Looking at the quality of everything, I hope they will last. Like the previous ones, aluminum knuckle with steel bearing. They may seize in the future. That's one downside to having an aluminum knuckle. And another thing that changed, which I love, the apron covers are no longer that flimsy little rubber piece that with heat it falls apart and they're ridiculously expensive. This is plastic. Some folks will say, well, they're just plastic, but the plastic will not disintegrate like the rubber ones. This is actually an upgrade in my book. Let's take a look at the rear suspension of the 6th gen 4Runner. So here we have a very familiar suspension setup. You have a 4-link. It's not exactly the same as the 5th gen, but it's almost exactly the same. Nothing strange here. A few interesting things. Now this does have a solid rear axle, just like the 5th gen. A few interesting things that I like. Finally, the top of the shock has a cutout in the body so you can access the top nut. That was the thing with the 5th gen where there was a fight to get to it because they didn't give you any room. Here, they kind of notched the body so you have a very clear access to it, which is really nice that they thought of service like that. The second thing is the brake lines are still on the rear differential. They did change their direction, I'm assuming because the fuel tank moved and the exhaust moved, but the ends are still exposed. But I noticed a coating on them. I hope that is like something to prevent rust, because usually they're fully coated, the brake lines, just the tips are not. So I hope they're starting to put a coating on it to protect it. Let's talk about the brakes of the 6th Gen 4Runner, starting with the front brakes. Initially, at first glance, it looks very familiar. However, things are very different here. These rotors are slotted fins, not like the straight fins in the past. So this is a thicker rotor. Hopefully it has better heat dissipation, because the 5th Gen 4Runner in the front brakes likes to go through brakes and likes to warp rotors. So this rotor is very different. I'm hoping that is a response to that. The caliper is, at first glance, looks exactly the same, but it's actually an offset caliper. So that's a 4-piston caliper, fixed caliper. You notice they changed this. This clip is new. We didn't have that before. We only had the pins and a little flimsy clip here to hold the pads. This is kind of going back to the previous generation, all the way back to the 3rd Gen, I believe, that had this. This is a better setup. I like this a lot better. So they did tweak a few things here with the brakes in the front, but the biggest change, different rotor, slightly different kind of hardware here on the pads. Another thing that is a significant change from the 5th Gen, the booster. On the gasoline models, you don't have the hydro giant unit. You just have a vacuum booster, which is actually, if you ask me, that is a lot simpler than the giant unit that the 4Runner used to have. Now, on the hybrid model, you do have the giant unit, of course, but it's not exactly the same. It's a lot more involved, because that has a stroke simulator, there's a hybrid system, you have regenerative braking and whatnot. But basically, if you have a hybrid one, you will have a very complicated brake booster situation. If you have a non-hybrid one, very basic, vacuum operated, can't break it. Let's take a look at the rear brakes, which changed significantly. So you no longer have the parking brake and the rotor head. That's gone. You have electronic parking brake, and before you really get upset by that, let me share with you two things. I love this. It's much better, because two things. If you own a 5th Gen 4Runner and you've done rear brakes, you know that they love to get stuck. The shoes get stuck to the rotor and you pull them, everything comes apart, and they're kind of not fun to do. This style they started with the 2022 Tundra is actually a superior style to any electronic parking brake. Reason being is, you're a DIYer and you want to do your brakes, you don't need no fancy scan tool, no some special procedure or whatever. You have 2 bolts on this actuator, take it out, pull it out, hang it to the side, do your brakes. When you're done, just put the actuator back, 2 bolts, have a nice day. It's as simple as that, which is beautiful. This is the best way to do it. The other change is we no longer have, which thank you Toyota for that, we no longer have where the bolt for the caliper is actually the pin. It's not a great design. They used to have this big rubber thing inside here that gets ripped and twisted and all the mess, and that's what usually makes the rear brakes fail early. We have an independent pin from the bolt that holds the caliper. The brakes are about the same size. I feel like the pads are slightly wider. That's about it. But the rotor is very different, because you don't have the space here to put all the parking brake hardware, which I really like. And one more thing about your 6th Gen 4Runner, in case you didn't know, comes with a bell. Tuned by Yamaha, I guess. That's pretty cool. Let's do a quick run through underneath it. Some of the items we didn't talk about. The stem is really not nice, but the good thing is you can actually take it out if you don't like it, because moving away from that. Gone are the metal covers. There's nothing. This is limited here. You only have this little fabric cover. Now, some folks will say that is horrible, that is the end of the world. If you work on these or yourself, or you change the oil, you'll be very happy, because the metal one on the Limited, for example, that's not meant for off-road, nah, not fun. Let's put it this way. But here's the interesting part. Drain plug is right here, and the oil filter is right there. Can it be simpler than that for an oil change? And coolant drain. Again, can it be simpler than that? Very simple. There's no more cover underneath the transmission, at least in the Limited model here. So one less cover you got to take out. Going back here, I love, it just, truth have to be said, folks, I love the quality of things here. This is definitely different than the Tacoma, and even, dare I say, the Land Cruiser. Look at this finish on this drive shaft. Looks beautiful. The pan, everything, the frame. Love the finish. This is, of course, made in Japan here. Continues to be. The exhaust quality is exceptional. And look at this. Look how beautiful. Everything, beautiful. The welds. Everything is exceptional. This is really giving me good. We're going to continue on the 5th gen vibes. Fuel tank moved from here to here. We still have the partial cover for the non-off-road oriented models and the full cover for the off-road oriented models. Pretty decent sized tank. It's got narrower and longer. That's how I feel it became. The frame, of course, is different. This is, you notice the heavy emphasis on covering everything on the side and leaving things open at the bottom to drain. I like that there's more space here, and they ran the lines, all the lines run on top of the frame. That is pretty interesting. Brake lines, I believe the brake lines run actually here, and they used to do that in the LS400 long time ago, but they run on top of the frame. They're no longer on the body. That is actually pretty cool. As we walk our way back here, there is, everything here looks beautiful. I just gotta say it. This is same rear end, solid. The vent moved here. That's where the vent is at. And there is a small thing. Why is the spare tire off center, Toyota? We just look at it. This is the first thing I saw. If you come from the back here and look at it, it's off center. This is the center of the car. It is more this way than this way. Presumably because, to make space for this exhaust, because, the 5th generation 4Runner was an electric car. It didn't have an exhaust. What exactly happened here, Toyota? This will drive me just off. I'll end up taking the spare tire off because I can't look at the back of my car. Mostly this will drive me above all. Why? I mean, we have space here. I hope you didn't run out of pipe. Make this pipe slightly longer, this bracket slightly shorter. Have the pipe come out here and center the spare tire. Couldn't do that. But what they could do is keep the rattly chain. That certain things never change. Now I'm noticing with the 4Runner now, they're heavy on the towing. Tow hitch. And it's part of the frame. If you look at it, it is part of the frame. Good, not good. Good for, towing stability or whatnot, but not good because if you get an accident, you did technically damage the frame if this gets bent. That's the good and bad. Love that this is all covered. Folks, I just gotta say one thing. The quality of things underneath here is a very good sign. I don't see a lot of flimsy stuff. We saw some weird flimsy stuff on the Tacoma, even the Land Cruiser. Not here. This is very impressive. I just gotta say that. And it's the truth, folks. Let's take a look at the outside of the 6th generation Toyota 4Runner. I gotta say one thing. Looks are gonna be all over the place. Let's put it this way. Some will like it, some will not. But I'm going to focus this time on this review, not really on the looks. I'm going to focus on the features, starting with this beautiful paint. Folks, this is not a prototype. This is a production vehicle. This is made in Japan, and this paint is making me very jealous because I own a 2024 Toyota Tundra, and let's put it this way. My paint don't look like that. Especially on the black parts. Just look at that. That just looks beautiful. If my Tundra was painted like that, I'll be very happy. So Japan still can paint cars, unlike cars made in the US. Moving past that. Interesting front. I'm going to leave it at that. I feel like it does have a lot of angular stuff, whatnot, but so did the 5th gen. So this is, again, a matter of taste. The radar sensor is right here. You do have the 360 camera underneath it. You do have some fog lights. I feel like it's more square and sharp lines and whatnot, but I don't think it looks bad, except that bottom part looks horrible. It's like the Tacoma. It looks so completely out of place. Let's just get that out of the way. Headlights. you have two style headlights with two styles inside of them. So the lower trims will have a different headlight. They're all LEDs though. And then the Limited will have this one. Some of the other off-road models will have exactly the same headlights, just this is orange. So here is that. The look on the side. There's some changes from the 5th gen. Obviously, it's a completely new generation. Let's talk about them. This has a similar profile than the previous one, except we now have a higher hood and a dip. That's to make the windows bigger for more visibility. And now we have this cool raise here, just to give it like an angular look. 5th gen was just drawn by a ruler and whatnot in the back. Some stuff I like. This is similar to the 5th gen. The flare arches, they are body color in this one, just like the 5th gen. And I really like that this part is just not just an illusion, it is actually stuck out. And this part as well. This exact section reminds me a lot of the 5th gen, very similar. Now, a few things we're going to talk about here. You have a little aerodynamic area here. It's an opening. And then the wheel design on this particular one, pretty cool. I do like it. It kind of fits the overall design of the car. This is a limited trim, by the way. The center cap is no longer one of those caps that just the whole thing comes out. It's just the center cap. I really like this change. They're moving away from that. This particular limited 4Runner, which clearly says limited here, not here for some reason, does have automatic side steps. Now, this is an option. I really like it. I don't think you really need it in a 4Runner, but it's there if you need it. That is a nice thing. Going around the back here, I am not exactly in love with these taillights. I don't think they look very good. I think that middle part doesn't look very nice. The back is very angular, very 4Runnery. Let's put it this way. That's a word. I just made that word up. Does say Toyota here. I wish this was in different font. It just looks very cheap and flimsy, honestly. And then the 4Runner at the bottom looks really nice. I like how they didn't write limited turbo, hybrid, non-hybrid, four-wheel drive, all this stuff. Look how clean that looks. Just beautiful. And the 2025 4Runner still has a bumper. A lot of new cars are getting away from that. And you do notice the heavy emphasis on the trailer hitch in these newer cars. I really love how they did this one. They don't have some weird cover that sits here and you have to take it out. No, it's just here. I really like this new hitch cap. Love it. Now, another hallmark feature of the 4Runner is still here. The window that rolls down. Just know one thing, some folks have commented on this. You can't operate the power back door with the window open. That does make sense because that is a feature of the car. Now in the 4Runner, which has joined the 21st century, finally, you have an optional power door. Let's open it up. Here's the interesting thing. The motors that operate this door is right here, inside the shock. Notice where the wire is. It's right here. Doesn't go through the headliner. It goes here. That's a much better spot, and I'm glad they're continuing that. Let's talk about a few things here. You have two LED lights here. You have close, and lock. It's a bigger space than the 5th gen. And what I love about this is, and this is something that we got to say about newer Toyotas, the plastics on the inside are getting super cheap. Not here. This is significantly different, the feel of the plastics, than the Tacoma. I love this. This feels exactly the same as the 5th gen 4Runner plastics, except you have more things. Let's put it this way. Love it. The space here is pretty large. I'm going to fold the second row so you guys can see it. That's a pretty large space. Gotta say that. Now, two things we're going to talk about here as we make our way to the interior. This has an optional third row seat. If you get a hybrid, you can't get an optional third row seat because this is where the battery would be. Unlike the Tundra where the battery is underneath the back seat, this would be right here, right where which I think is a great idea. You have an option of a third row, but you don't get it with a hybrid. I can live with that. Now, the third row we gotta talk about. You put this up, third row is up. Where's my seat? So you come around, Jose, and show them this part. Where's my seat, Toyota? Oh, where's my seat, Toyota? Where do I sit? Well, you gotta do this deal, if I can do it from the back. There we go. Now we got a third row seat. It's only 2 seats. They're not the biggest in the planet. They're usable-ish, but I can live with that. This is an option. If you do want the third row in your 4Runner, you can actually still get one, which is pretty cool. Now, with the third row seat up, your space here is pretty limited. I mean, if you really want to sit people comfortably here, it's gotta be more like this. That's not a lot of space, but the nice thing is this is almost a straight down. It just has a slight curve at the top. So this space up to probably right here is pretty usable, and I like that. There is one more thing, and this is one of the biggest changes for the 4Runner. They're really pushing on the towing part, which is really nice. You notice this light, you can actually control it from the inside. This is a trailer light, so you can connect your trailer, and it actually lights up this entire space. That is actually pretty cool, and you can have it with the door, or you can have it on or off via a switch. That is actually pretty cool that they're dedicating things to this. Now you notice here we have 2 cameras. One of them is the backup camera. One of them is for the rear view camera. I really dislike them, but yeah, there it is if you want it. 2 things that are interesting. This camera has a little tiny little baby washer on it. And then for some reason, I don't understand, we have these 2 little thingies. I don't know exactly what they do. Tried to find out, got bored in the process. There's these little thingies here. Just your 4Runner has a couple thingies in the back. And lastly, and I love that they kept it this way, there is a rear wiper, but it's hidden up here. That is really nice. Gives it a clean look. And that is not the reason they did that. Because this window comes down, they had to have the wiper not rest on the glass. So, just wanted to get that out of the way. Let's take a look at the interior of the 2025 Toyota 4Runner. Initially, you get into this interior, looks very similar to the Tacoma. But here's the interesting part. It just feels better. Plastics feel better. Everything feels a lot better. Mainly because this is made in Japan. Let's talk about a few things. So, starting with the gauges, you have 2 options of gauges. There's the big screen, and then there's not so big screens, kind of like a middle screen, smaller size screen. They both work okay. It basically feels like any other Toyota lately, with the big screen or the small one. They have exactly the same features. The infotainment, this is a 21mm infotainment system, came out a while back. Pretty good, works pretty good. Does have wireless Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, glitchy at times. Exactly the same thing you'll find in newer Toyotas. You do have the option of a 14-inch screen or an 8-inch screen. This one is the 14-inch screen that's limited as you go down the trims. But I mean, an 8-inch screen does exactly the same what this does. Exactly the same. That's the best part. Now, there are certain things that they just didn't change, and I love it. HVAC controls, all physical button. Shifter, big behemoth shifter with a cable. Don't need to change it. Everything is touch button. This giant screen, all it does is display what you're playing on the radio or the navigation. Everything else is physical. There's so many buttons here. I love it. You gotta say that. Now, let's talk about a few interesting things here. First, you have all 4Runners have an adjustable headlight height. They're not automatic. That's pretty cool because you can actually control it yourself. Usually we don't get stuff like this in the US, but now we do. Let's talk about some of the off-road features because this is really pushing the off-road envelope here. Optional in certain models, you will have the multi-terrain select, but now you can engage it in 4High and it has an auto mode. And because the power steering now is electric, It actually changes the input of the steering as well. It doesn't just change the powertrain and whatnot, it changes the steering as well. This can be optioned with DAC and crawl. They are pretty similar to the previous generations. And another thing that they are really emphasizing in this one is the towing part. Well, you can option it to a suite of towing stuff. You have brake controller, you have trailer backup assist, you have trailer blind spot, you have trailer straight path assist, you have trailer light check. There's a lot of stuff. I feel like I'm very familiar with them with my Tundra. I feel like they are shifting the 4Runner into a towing vehicle. Now, it's not as capable, say, as the Tundra and Sequoia, but still, it's really nice to have all these features. And they are available now in the 4Runner. Now, let's talk about a couple gimmicks. Let's just get them out of the way. This, just like the Tacoma, has the biggest gimmick in the planet. You know, I was at Costco the other day. I saw one that looks just like it. It's $180. So, guarantee you they're not charging you $180 to put this on the dash, the coolest thing in the planet. But this one gets one more gimmick. If you open the door and look here, you get a little light. Look at that. And this light even turns red. Very, very nice gimmick here. And that concludes the end of the gimmicks of the 4Runner, which I like. Let's talk about a few things here. First, the size. On paper, this is larger and more interior space than the previous one. In certain areas it's not, but majority of stuff it is. But when you sit here, it doesn't feel like you have giant miles of space. And that has to do with the way this drives. Compared to the 5th gen, this is a lot more composed, a lot more composed. The best way I'll describe the 5th generation 4Runner, if you've never driven one, it's like you're sitting on a waterbed trying to drive. That's how that feels like. It's very wobbly, you hit the brakes, the whole thing nosedives, and that's just how they work, as they're a 14-year-old car. But this handles a lot better. Very composed. You drive it on the highway, it's like you're driving a normal car. It doesn't feel wallowy and shaky, but that comes at a hefty price. It's not smooth. That was a surprise. I mean, this is a limited trim with AVS. It's not smooth at all. I mean, the ride is bumpy, at points jarring. You put it in Sport and Sport Plus. 4Runner has a Sport Plus mode now. It's very jarring. Very surprisingly so. And the idea is this is a rugged suspension for the overlanding owner. Yeah, but this is a limited one. This is supposed to be the luxury one. And I guarantee you the Platinum ride's exactly the same. I haven't driven a Platinum, but it has the exact same suspension. So it's probably the same thing. That was kind of a shocker, honestly. It's not a smooth car. And that part... Interior, however, the quality of things is very impressive. Talked about that, but it's just... This is even the leather and the steering wheel feels completely different than the Tacoma. If the Tacoma looked like this, I think a lot of folks would actually like it, because this is very nice. Let's go in the back seat and continue our talk about the size, because this is my driving position. Now, the 4Runner is not the biggest SUV in the planet. I'm 5'7". I can sit here pretty comfortably. I have decent knee room, decent headroom, and if you notice here, this particular one has a sunroof. Look at the dip. It's right here, right when you get the second row seat, it just dips up. That's the end of the sunroof structure right here. I think if you get this without the sunroof, you'll have even more headroom, because this hump wouldn't be here. And that hump, if you look at it, it continues up to here. They're really trying to give the driver maximum headroom. But if you don't have this, this would be the level of the roof. So if you're tall and you're considering this, possibly consider one without a sunroof if you don't care too much for the sunroof. I highly encourage that. Something else we're going to talk about here. The 4Runner, previous 4Runner, did have a 400 watt household outlet here and one in the back. The hybrid one has a 2400 watt. That is super cool. It's like we talked about the addition of the alternator and all the auxiliary stuff. You have 2400 watt. That is actually pretty cool. In the hybrid model, you have two of them, not just one. But the non-hybrid just has a 400 watt, which is very sufficient as well. So, the 2025 6th generation Toyota 4Runner. We're going to look at this from two perspectives because we got to have a talk. Let's talk about this. The previous generation, the 5th generation, was basically a 2010 model year that just kept getting plugs and plugs to keep it going. In 2024, if you bought one, you bought a 14-year-old design. Two perspectives to look at that. This makes the 5th generation 4Runner feel like a Flintstone car. That's the only way I'll say it. But at the same time, when you get behind the wheel of a 5th gen 4Runner, knowing that everything behind the scenes is very old school, very basic and simple, give folks the feeling of security. This is reliable. This is a safe buy. This, on the other hand, things are modern, and modern equal complex. There's a lot more going on behind the scenes in this because it is a proper modern car. But one thing remained exactly the same as the 5th gen. They didn't overcomplicate things inside. You sit in this car and you're coming from a 5th gen 4Runner. Things are very basic to operate. Everything is physical button. They didn't go everything in the screen. Screen is just a radio, just an infotainment, doesn't do anything else. You can customize the features and whatnot, but everything you operate is a physical button. I like that part. The other thing is, the previous 4Runner basically handled like a giant boat. That was the handling. It was not a good handling car, folks. We all have to say the truth. This handles a lot better. I mean, it is on a different planet. This is a composed, you could drive at a highway speed, windy or not, very comfortably and very kind of relaxed. You don't feel like the car is all over the place. But at the same time, the 5th generation 4Runner, especially the limited, this one is a limited too, was a lot smoother. This was a shocker to me how unsmooth this is. I mean, this is a limited with ABS suspension. You expect this to be the nicest riding SUV. It isn't. It's very jarring, very rough, not smooth at all. Very surprising. And then going back to the core function of the 4Runner, off-road. This is a lot more capable off-road than the previous 4Runner. That truth have to be said, even if it's base form without the off-road specific models. That is something to be said about this. Now, compared to the previous one, this has a lot more trims, a lot more options you can select and specific trims you can select. But it also has a few gimmicks. The higher you go in the trim, the more gimmicks start adding up. That's the other thing. And then the biggest, most heated debate, the pricing. And some folks will jump out of the seat right now and say, it's way too expensive. I actually disagree. Let's talk about this because we can remember, we're looking at this from two perspectives. When we compare the SR5 to the 2024 SR5, which is the 5th gen, this is slightly more, but it's significantly more car. That's the God honest truth, folks. It is safer. It has more options. It drives better. Maybe not as smooth, but more composed as a daily driver. It's more modern. Gets better gas mileage. But at the same token, a little bit more complicated. Talk about the engine in a moment here. So there is a trade-off. But to me, that slight increase in MSRP between SR5 to SR5 24 to 25 is actually not large, and you're getting a lot more car. But as we start going beyond the SR5 trim, and I feel like that was intentional from Toyota, the difference in price between the 5th gen and the 6th gen is right around $5,000. The 6th gen being $5,000 more. And that is a lot of money, and I agree with that. But it's also a lot of car and a lot more options, a safer car. So there's that trade-off. However, things completely go out of control when you jump into the hybrid models. Before we get to that hybrid model part, let me share with you a couple things. The engine. This is the biggest concern of folks that are coming from the 1G RFE, looking at this one. Oh my God, it's a 4-cylinder engine that has a turbo. Here's the bottom line. The 1G RFE did one thing well and 10 things not well. The one thing it did well was it just kept running and running and running and never complained. Even when you neglect it, it kept running. But it was underpowered, it was rattly, it was loud, And when things do go south, they are actually very complicated to work on. That's the reality of it. This engine, you can't just neglect it and expect it to last like the 1GR. If you take care of it, it has everything for it to last a long time. But if you neglect it, like a lot of 4Runner, 5th gen 4Runner owners do, that's not going to be the case. Does get better gas mileage. It is also rattly. It is also extremely loud, especially when you go into direct injection mode. But this makes more power. When you take out everything out of perspective, just focus on the power or drivability itself, this actually drives better because this has more torque and has more immediate and consistent torque. So if you really look at it that way, it is an upgrade over the 1GR. But when you come to reliability, you can't just neglect this and expect it to last like the 1GR. That's the reality. And the last thing I want to talk about is the hybrid models. There is one big question I have for Toyota, that they have not done this part well at all. And I wondered from the day I heard the 250 series Land Cruiser announced, why do we have the 4Runner and the Land Cruiser at the same time? And why would anyone pay over $60,000 for this when you can have the Land Cruiser, which is more comfortable, nicer, a lot smoother, and it's a Land Cruiser? I don't understand. It has the exact same powertrain. It's also a hybrid. Looks better, in my opinion. That's the question I have. Because here is the problem. They made the 4Runner so off-road and towing focused that it's not smooth. And almost like that's the main thing it has to do. And it does it very well. But the problem is 90% of 4Runner owners don't really off-road with them. That's the reality. But then the Land Cruiser is softer than this, less capable than this off-road, and it's a Land Cruiser. You'd expect the Land Cruiser primary function to be off-road. I feel like this should have been the other way around. Buy the Land Cruiser as the ultimate off-roader, and buy this as a still very serious off-roader, but more comfortable, smoother, more creature comforts, more family usable and whatnot. That's not the case. This is a limited, and it's jarring because it has tough suspension meant to tackle anything, but not the road. So basically, let me summarize this to you. Really like the new generation 4Runner. I think they touched on the points that owners of 4Runners actually quietly complain. Owners of 4Runners will never openly admit this, but let's be honest here. They did this update very well. And what's so impressive about this is the quality of things. I mean, you get in a 24 Tacoma, it's very plasticky and cheap. This is exactly the same interior almost, but it doesn't feel plasticky and cheap, even though it is all plastic. But it just feels nicer because this is made in Japan. And underneath it is the same story. It's like it's the exact same powertrain as a Tacoma, but it just feels and looks and everything is better. That's the God honest truth, folks. But when you get into the higher trims, buy a Land Cruiser. It'll be better, smoother, and it's a Land Cruiser. I'll just leave you with that. I think Toyota, that's the only thing they didn't do well, is that they flipped it. This should have been the smooth one. The other one should have been the more serious off-roader. Folks, I hope this video was helpful and informative. I hope you learned something new. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some other videos. Until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and you have yourself a wonderful day.